We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is only the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome. Good morning, everyone. You're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, New York. This is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. I'm also joined by my good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
Hello.
And Mary Lawrence.
Good morning.
This is episode 64 of Evidence of Design. It is Saturday, the 24th of August, 2019, and if you are tuning into this show after the Afrocentric show, what we do here is talk about income and wealth inequality. We promote democratic values and social justice. That is what we are all about here on the show, and we are all about hearing from you as well. Today, we are going to be talking about a number of issues related to climate change, particularly the impact of fire and what it means to kind of have a healthy fire or a not healthy fire. As you might have heard on the news, with so many forest fires raging every fire season, and the fire seasons are kind of getting longer and more spasmodic and sporadic, we are here to talk about climate change related to fire stewardship. And we want to hear from you throughout the hour. There are many ways for you to participate. The first and foremost, in a live radio station, Grassroots, 585-219-8889. 585-219-8889. Give us a buzz at any time. Do not be shy. Don't feel like you're interrupting us. Feel free to give us a call. If you're a little more shy, you don't want to have your voice on the air, that's all right. radioeod@gmail.com. or Facebook and Twitter at Radio EOD. That's what we're here for. Matt, I want to ask you a question real quick.
Okay.
And you're a doctor, all right? Let's pretend you're a doctor. I'm the patient.
I was going to say I didn't know about that.
Congratulations.
Nor did I.
You are now a doctor. That's simple. I'm a patient.
That was easy.
I'm coming to you, and I'm asking you, doctor, you know, I am the state of human society right now. I need some help. Right? Mm-hmm. How would you, doctor, describe my experience right now, what I'm suffering from, if anything at all, as a state of our society? Am I doing all right?
No.
That was pretty quick.
You need to lose some weight. Ooh, your cholesterol's really high.
Just my cholesterol.
Because you're stressed out all the time, and you need to stop burning fossil fuels all over your face.
That was a pretty quick response.
All over your face.
Mary, you're a specialist. I'm going to see now because my doctor's like, you're out of my hands. There's too much wrong with me. Is there any hope for me, Mary?
First of all, I'm curious as to what specialist Matt referred you to. You know, which of the problems did he highlight to send over?
The Undertaker.
Ooh. Oh, we're not there yet, I think. Not quite yet. Yeah. I would probably diagnose you with some cancer and put you under cancer treatment, but we're not going to go into radiation too much.
Okay. So I need some help, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you need some serious help.
Well, hopefully, throughout this hour, as we talk about climate change, where it can get pretty morbid pretty fast, we'll talk about some things that we can find some light at the end of the tunnel.
This is your intervention.
It is about fire, so there will be a lot of light.
Yes, indeed. Are we ready to take it away?
Oh, certainly.
Creature in the sky got sucked in a hole. Now there's a hole in the sky, and the ground's not cold. And if the ground's not cold, everything is gonna burn. Well, I'll take turns. I'll get mine too. This smoke is gone to heaven. This smoke is gone
Monkey Gone to Heaven by the Pixies.
And this is 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester, New York. You're listening to Evidence of Design, and today we're talking about fighting fire with fire. There's a lot going on in the news right now with the Amazon, which is located mainly in Brazil. What's going on in the Amazon? Mary, can you fill us in on kind of what's happening there right now?
Yeah, sure. So I was also going to say not only the news, but social media has been absolutely blowing up with photos and reports of fires in the Amazon.
Thanks to Leo.
Sorry?
Thanks to Leo DiCaprio.
What?
Leonardo.
Yeah. He posted on his Instagram of like 34 million people about the Amazon.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant you were thanking him for the fires. I was like,
Yes, thank you.
I don't know.
Thank
I
you
don't know
for-
what you're talking about. But yeah, okay, yeah, I did see that. Or read about that actually. So yeah, there are a lot of fires in the Amazon, and what I was interested in talking about today is, looking at healthy forests and what fires mean for healthy forests. One thing that's really concerning about the fires in the Amazon is, a lot of people have been referring to them as the lungs of the earth. They I think they process like 20% of the carbon dioxide in the world, which is huge, that's in one concentrated area. So seeing them up in flames is obviously terrifying. And so a lot of people have been wondering about, how did these start? Is it climate change? Is it politics? Like, what's going on?
Is it NGOs?
Is it NGOs? Well, there's one particular person who's bringing that up, and we'll get into that in a moment. But so basically, we want to look into, how the fires started. They are up, there are fires in the Amazon every year.
Yeah.
All healthy forests undergo fire. It helps to clear out dead wood, helps to, keep spacing.
Though I've read that the Amazon is sort of resistant to fires because of how humid and moist the
Yeah,
region
it has
is.
been for a long time. And with droughts over the past few decades, it's been getting less resistant. So a lot of the fires right now, which is one of the greatest concerns, are not actually natural fires. They're not fires that are, started by lightning strikes as we'd see here. And we'll talk about domestic fires a little later on as well. But a lot of the fires that are being started in the Amazon are actually started by humans. Matt, you had a great word for that you wanted to bring up.
Anthropogenic.
And what does anthropogenic mean?
It's in terms of climate change, it is climate change that is caused by human activity. It's my contribution for the day. I'm done.
Matt's muting the mic now.
So we have anthropogenic climate change, which is, as Matt said, humans causing climate change. And that seems to be what happens with these fires. Was that Jason?
Yeah, we should pause right there and say, anthropogenic, that is kind of the hang-up when it comes to the climate change debate. Unfortunately, in this country where, the rest of the world kind of agrees that humans are influencing the climate, period. And why are humans influencing the climate? Well, humans have always influenced the environment because of the way we interact symbiotically with it. The problem, though, is that starting with the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, when we had the tools and technology and social structure to mass produce goods and services and really extract natural resources for the purposes of mass producing goods, that's when really the modern sort of problems with the climate are emerging, because we are using the environment as a tool at too fast of a rate, unsustainably so, in an unhealthy way, just to produce goods and services, etc. And doing that has raised the quality of living for billions of human beings on this planet, right? So we have done such a good job at abusing the environment that we have fairly comfortable lives for many people across the planet. The problem, though, of course, is that won't last. It's not sustainable. And so you have people out there, particularly the Republican Party in the United States, not every Republican, but at least those who have the power to make decisions within it, are sort of publicly saying that, climate change, schmimate change, humans don't really impact it that much, and the climate changes all the time. And that's an issue, because you're sort of missing the very foundational aspect of this debate. And we're not here to debate that, but, Matt, when you say the word anthropogenic, there's a lot there, and that's pretty important to understand. Like, you know, fundamentally, we are impacting the climate in pretty profound ways.
Absolutely.
And that is sort of the issue, or that is the issue in Brazil right now. So there is, on one hand, climate change is affecting the ability of the Amazon to burn. You know, with there being droughts and not as much rain, the Amazon has been losing humidity, and it makes it easier to burn. As I mentioned,
season or the drought.
Yeah,
the dry season
there is a natural season where the Amazon would burn naturally, but as you just said, it is getting longer. On top of that, there is, you know, Jason, you brought up a really good point of, you know, people saying, well, we don't have climate change, and using our resources, using natural resources, has increased our standard of living, so we might not see it as a problem. And that's what's happening in Brazil. So all of these, or many of these fires, which, as I mentioned, have increased by 83% from this time last year, which is enormous. If you look at a map of Brazil right now, it looks like the entire bottom is on fire. But many of those fires have been started by farmers. Those farmers are looking to clear land. Often this land is either for cattle grazing or to grow soy, which is often used in cattle feed. So that, you know, is for agricultural production. We might look at that as a good thing. And certainly the Bolsonaro administration, so the president of Brazil, is in support of that. You know, so the rest of the world is sort of looking at what's going on in Brazil and saying, like, why isn't someone stopping them? But in fact, there is a government that is backing these farmers who started fires to clear land because it's helping their businesses, it's helping their economy.
Yeah, so we talked about Jair Bolsonaro before on the show. I believe he was elected as president of Brazil last year, and he is a far-right sort of populist candidate, Trumpian in style, if you want to invoke that term.
People have called him the Trump of Brazil.
Yes, the Trump of the tropics, I believe.
Oh, yeah. That's the nickname.
He's also been dubbed Captain Chainsaw, apparently, by cited in a Vox News article.
Oh, I didn't hear that one.
Yes.
That's a pretty cool nickname.
Captain Chainsaw and the Trump of the tropics.
Not that it's one that we should be happy about. Captain Chainsaw.
Yeah. So Bolsonaro is a character, as I think he wants to be, with so many politicians we're seeing nowadays, unfortunately, riding on the backs of broken neoliberal policies for decades. You know, people have lost trust with the government because the government hasn't been looking out genuinely for the interests of people. They've been looking out for the interests of businesses across the world.
Yeah, and he taps into that same frustration by going after, you know, indigenous people in Brazil and women and marginalized other marginalized groups. Right.
And so we see that with Trump, we see that with Matteo Salvini in Italy, we see that with Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and all of these politicians are sort of riding on the backs of populist discontent, where people are rightfully angry at a lot of things, but their anger is being misplaced and channeled for the interests of the wealthy and people who come off as like reality TV stars. And so Bolsonaro, of course, has been a climate change denialist, and he has sided heavily with the business community in Brazil to try to sort of spur on economic development and growth. And there is a lot of resources that can come out of Amazon. Even before these fires, Mary,
the Amazon, not Amazon company.
Right, yeah. Not Jeff Bezos. So in the Amazon rainforest, there's been articles for a decade that saying there's too much deforestation going on in the Amazon.
I mean, I remember writing about that in high school.
Right.
You know?
That's a long-term problem. And that goes back, again, to sort of the interest of our industrial capitalism. And it's like, to the way our political economy is structured, these extraction of natural resources is unsustainable. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have to redefine what success means. We should also redefine what we're tuned into right now, and that's 100.9 FM WXIR. Thanks for tuning in here, whether you are at 100.9 on your FM radio dial, or if you're listening online at www.1009wxir.com. Thanks for being here, and we're talking about fighting fire with fire today, some of the fires going on in the Amazon rainforest, and later on we'll get to what are some good fires. Mary, you mentioned at the top of the hour, it's like, wait a second, sometimes it's kind of good to let a forest burn, and we'll get into that because that's really interesting, and I'm curious to learn more about that. I want to remind you, though, that you can participate in this discussion at 585-219-8889. Again, that is 585-219-8889. So, Mary, we have these fires going on in the Amazon rainforest. Jair Bolsonaro has had sort of policies in place that have at least let farmers burn more land.
Yeah, so it's not
I don't think
completely
it's like,
legal. It's
yeah.
just he's raised restrictions and no one's really stopping them. No one's enforcing laws because he is, quietly backing them.
I think like his rhetoric has sort of tended towards saying he would support farmers. It's kind of like...
Yeah, I think he also legitimately raised restrictions.
He did?
It's very similar to what Trump is doing
environmental
here,
deregulation.
allowing more fracking or allowing more oil to be taken from state lands or public lands. It's a kind of a similar idea.
But the Amazon rainforest is still supposed to be heavily protected, even despite those regulations that he's lifted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But so is our public land, and things are still happening. But one thing is that you have to have a system in place that's going to stop those people from burning, and no one is doing that. The EU and so I think I read Germany and Norway in particular have historically been giving a lot of money to save the Amazon, and they're pulling out because they're not in favor of what Bolsonaro is supporting. I don't know what kind of problems that's going to continue to arise because if the Amazon isn't getting the funding, but I don't know where their funding was going previously. If it was supporting the government to help protect the Amazon, then I'm not sure.
Yeah, as I understand it from the sort of information that I read, there are sort of heavy fines in place for people who deforest the Amazon, for lack of a better term. But those fines are rarely ever enacted.
Yeah, and they certainly have to have someone to enforce them.
Matt, you brought up Bolsonaro's rhetoric. Let's talk about what the Bolsonaro administration has. What has been their response so far?
He's blamed NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or perhaps nonprofit would be a term people are more familiar with. Basically saying that he made the claim that these NGOs were unhappy that they were being defunded as a result of his environmental sort of lifting of restrictions on environmentalism, and made the claim that they had started these fires to sort of make him look bad, I guess, without providing any sort of evidence at the time or so far.
Yeah. Something that I would just love to say, I guess, to people like Bolsonaro and Trump is like, when they have this kind of reaction, it's just like, guys, it's not about you. Like, it's not
he's
all
the
about
chosen
you.
one.
Yeah, he's the chosen one. Yeah. He's
when I
here.
read that same thing, I was just like, dude, people aren't going to destroy an entire ancient forest because they don't like you.
Yeah.
That's like the degree of ego that has to go into that.
But they will do it for money.
Yep.
Sorry?
They will do it for money.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know about you guys, but Bolsonaro's own reaction to this, for me, is very reminiscent of every time there's sort of like a white nationalist attack in America, and Trump goes like, well, we need to get rid of hate. We need to like put things aside. And that there's this very public and well-documented aspect of their personality that is emboldening these people to act in a certain way, and yet they disavow it when whenever it gets too much attention, and they feel like they need to play, I guess, a role.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here is Bolsonaro, literally the quote of him talking about NGOs, he's asked, do you have evidence of the fact that NGOs, or of the allegation that NGOs are like burning the forest because they don't like you, Bolsonaro? He's like, no, I don't have any evidence. I just have this feeling. And Donald Trump says that all the time. He talks about feelings, and that gets his voters riled up because, like, it's really easy to, like, feel things, and fear is a really great motivator for human beings. And so we see this all the time with Trump. 2 great examples, 2 easy examples. There's a trillion examples to go into, but one of them is, when Trump says, well, there were millions of undocumented immigrants who voted in this election, and, I still won despite that, and I would have won even bigger. literally, quote, bigger if sick, parentheses sick, if Hillary Clinton, she got more votes because of those undocumented immigrants. So I would have won the popular vote if it weren't for them. Well, Mr. Trump, do you have any evidence? No, I just have a feeling. And then he says, Barack Obama was sort of wiretapping me and he was spying on me. Well, Mr. Trump, do you have any evidence? No, I just have a feeling. And so it's like we're in this sort of political world right now where because of this ridiculous populism, where you have these sort of characters on stage who wield an enormous amount of power because our political systems have failed so much that people have been hoodwinked into voting for them. It's like we can just talk about feelings and say whatever we want and have no basis in reality or the future of this planet and societies. And so I agree, Matt, that if you're my doctor and I'm asking you, how am I doing as society, the initial response is not good. So that's kind of where we're at.
And let's talk specifically about how this right-wing populism is a danger to climate change. We talk about it being a danger to politics, but when you're talking about just having feelings about certain things, how can that be dangerous to the planet in particular? We're looking at the Amazon and saying, like, well, there are these fires, but we're having, like, look at how our economy is doing and look at the good state of being that we have right now.
A great example that's going on right now is what Trump is saying to the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. So historically, the president never intervenes with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is in charge of the nation's monetary policy. It's complicated, and they're supposed to be nonpartisan for very legitimate reasons, because we don't want the economy to be beholden to partisan politics. However, Trump has, for the whole time of his presidency, been trying to sway the Fed to do things that are short-term politically helpful to him. Trump wants a, quote, strong economy. I disagree with the notion that the economy is really strong right now, but Trump's riding on that. And, Trump is worried that if the economy goes south, or people start to think the economy is going bad, then he won't win 2020. And so right now he's pressuring Jerome Powell to reduce interest rates by a lot, even though that would be very harmful to the economy, in my opinion. And so the problem there, to answer your question about how is this partisan politics or populism or politicking based upon short-term emotions, how is this harmful to things like climate change, is because there are very real, long-term, and serious problems we have to deal with as a society in the 21st century, and we're never going to get there if we can't make long-term thinking normal, or if we can't make sacrifices. And so to solve climate change, well, not to solve, you don't solve climate change. You have to solve ourselves. If climate change is happening because we are the problem. And so what we need to do is change our behaviors, right? Change how the way our economy works. And that's very uncomfortable things to talk about. For example, everyone's got to recycle at the least. But more importantly than recycle, the phrase is reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle comes third. So recycling, people always think recycling is the most important. No, first you have to reduce
your reliance on certain things.
Right.
Yeah, such as fossil fuels, which is the issue that we're running into in the United States in particular that I mentioned, is, tapping into natural land, or not natural land, well, natural land, but public land that has for a long time been protected from development. Trump is trying to tap into those resources. And we have to make sure that we are stepping up to that. And one of the things that we can do is reduce the demand on those resources. And there's an interesting suggestion. Matt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up real quick a point that our guest Abigail McHugh-Griffa from the RPCC brought up last week.
The Rochester People's Climate Coalition, yeah.
Which was it's the most important, I guess, action to take in fighting climate change is to enact policies that will prevent, I guess, the further proliferation of fossil fuels. It's good to talk about recycling and what we can all do as individuals, but the heaviest contributors by far to climate change are governments and corporations, and those need to be heavily regulated going into the future.
Right.
Certainly. So I was going to go into an interesting suggestion that would help, that could help the Amazon. And And this is something that came from CNN, but I've seen it around on other sources as well. And this is the argument that the Amazon is burning because the world eats too much meat. And that's, we're looking at fires, we're looking at governments. We might not think about our dinner as much. And so I mentioned before that a lot of the Amazon has been burning because farmers have been lighting fires to clear land. This is for cattle to graze. It's for soy to feed cattle. But what is all that cattle doing? They just don't need space, but they're being grown for export primarily.
This is very funny for me because it's doubly bad that it's cows, because not only
is methane.
Because Jason, did you know that cows fart and cows burp, and they expel methane each time they do both of those things, and so they actually contribute to climate change.
Ocasio-Cortez has told me that.
Yeah. So, and methane, as we talk a lot about CO2, and how the Amazon processes a certain amount of CO2 for the world. Methane is even more potent and even worse.
4 times more?
I don't remember specifically, but it is significantly more potent as a greenhouse gas, and it is actively promoting climate change. So making space, taking down parts of the Amazon to make space for a more potent greenhouse gas is slashing our abilities to fight climate change significantly. And so one suggestion that is, in this case from CNN, was that we should stop eating as much meat. The U.S. only takes in about 2% of Brazilian meat exports, but I think it was China and Hong Kong together make up 44% of the Brazilian meat export.
I would just like to correct myself real quick.
Sure.
Methane is not 4 times more potent than carbon dioxide. It is 25 times more potent.
Oh my God. I wasn't expecting that.
Is that from Google or something, Matt?
That's from CNN.
CNN, yeah.
Cows alone are responsible for 41% of livestock greenhouse gas emissions, which account for 14.5% of total global emissions.
Yeah.
So stay with your point, though, Mary. You're talking about cows. So let me play the devil's advocate. What you hear a lot from the right, from conservatives, and this is, I was joking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the House of Reps person from Queens, New York. She's oftentimes attacked by conservatives by saying, "Oh, she just
wants to get rid of cows.
Wants to get rid of farting cows because, she wants to regulate everyone and turn us all into robots run by the government, a socialist government, So Mary, what I'm hearing you say is there is a correlation, or there is a complex, layered, and intricate relationship between deforestation, environmental deregulation, our food habits, and sort of farming policies and global trade intricacies.
That is exactly what I'm saying in a very eloquent way.
Right. And so very complex, very layered. And so when I'm hearing you say, clearing down forests to have cows graze on them is not just so cows aren't trapped in pens, because that's very sad for cows. It's, cows are being artificially kind of created and inseminated and force-fed.
They're not being artificially created. We're not there yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Cloned cows.
But the idea is, I'm hearing a suggestion that we could reduce our reliance on meat in our diets, and that could help the environment. Will it absolutely solve everything? No, not at all. But it's something we can do.
But it's something that we can actively do. And that is a legitimate, that's an actual suggestion of something that we as humans can do without having to go around and try and get people to sign petitions or whatever. We can just, make an effort not to buy Brazilian beef if we're buying beef at all, and maybe consider eating less meat.
But
the difficult thing is, again, the U.S. only consumes 2% of Brazil's exports, so it is something that has to be more of a worldwide effort, where China and Hong Kong are okay, maybe we should purchase less.
But this happens in the U.S. too. I mean,
absolutely,
we do the same practices. It's just that we don't have the Amazon rainforest in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We should mention that there was a trade deal that was recently sort of agreed upon, but hasn't yet been signed into law between the EU and Brazil, which would currently there is a 20% tax on beef imports from Brazil in the EU, but that would be lifted under this deal. However, I know at least Ireland has signaled that. Well, they were unhappy to begin with because I think they raise cattle heavily in Ireland as well, and this would certainly hurt their farmers if Brazilian beef became more affordable. Mm-hmm. But they have signaled that they will block it if more isn't done to stop these fires in the Amazon. And that is like an example of a significant sort of government action that could be taken. You know, raising taxes on Brazilian beef.
Yeah, I mean, government subsidies on meat is certainly a way that can encourage consumers to purchase a certain way. And if we're raising taxes on certain kinds of meat, that might, consumers are less likely to buy it. So even if, you don't necessarily want to look at the packaging, one thing that the government could do, which, I mean, I assume our government is not going to do this right now, but one thing it could do is a similar thing to that, is raising taxes on Brazilian beef imports if they are going to continue trading with them.
I have to assume that at least some of these fires are being inspired by the trade deal. That, people are like, oh, this is about to become a lot more profitable for me. Maybe I can expand. And I don't want to cast, I don't want to sound as if I'm coming after, farmers in Brazil.
Right, these individual farmers, yeah.
They're probably just trying to get by as best they can.
Exactly.
No, but it's certainly the government is supporting that kind of action.
Right.
Mm-hmm. In saying, we're supporting this trade deal, we're supporting, taking down our own resources.
That's why we need governments to support initiatives that still provide sort of economic economic opportunity for their people, but also do so in a way that helps to impact the climate in a positive way by investing in clean energy.
And in a long-term way. We don't just want to look at short-term sort of changes, but we want to look at what's going to be profitable and good for our population in the long term. Mm-hmm. With that, I would actually like to transition into our next topic, but let's take a quick
So, Matt, can we load up an interstitial there? And we should remind folks, exactly, Mary, that we're listening to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. We spent the first half an hour here talking about the fires going on in the Amazon rainforest and how complex and interlayered a lot of those problems are. And when we're talking about climate change, it gets very complex, and we have to be okay to have these sort of complicated conversations and try not to boil things down into memes, or just base feelings. And I think that'd be really important, especially the last point that both you, Matt and Mary made, that governments kind of have to be the one sort of leading this effort, and we as people have to kind of hold them accountable and be champions of this as well. And so we will continue the discussion talking after a short break about wildfires kind of more at home, more in the U.S., and can some fires be good, and what sorts of ways can we be better stewards of our forests to prevent a lot of mega fires that we've been seeing on the news over the past several years. Stay tuned. Give us a call over the break, 585-219-8889.
Slowly fading blue, the eastern hollows. Catch the dying sun, the nighttime follows. Silent and black, mirror pool. Mirrors a lonely place where I meet you. take me in your arms and start to burn. F-I-R-E-I-N-C-A-I-R-O, F-I-R-E-I-N-C-A-I-R-O, F-I-R-E-I-N-C-A-I-R-O. Then the heat disappears and the mirage fades away.
Fire in Cairo by The Cure.
And this is 100.9 FM WXIR. You're listening to Evidence of Design. We're talking about fighting fire with fire. We talked about the Amazon rainforest and the fires that are going on there right now in Brazil, but there are also, of course, fires that happen right here back home on these golden shores of the US of A.
They're very golden when there is fire on them, Jason.
They're extremely golden right now.
I do just want to give a quick shout out to Matt. Thank you for finding such relevant music for today's show. This is really wonderful.
No problem.
I guess it's not too hard to find things about fire.
So many puns.
Yeah.
A lot easier than neoliberalism anyway.
You just wait.
Oh, man. Yeah, maybe not yet. So yeah, we just talked for about a half hour about fires going on in the Amazon, and we want to scale it back and take a look at what's going on a little bit closer to home. I guess most of you probably don't know me, but I have spent a couple of summers working in New Mexico. I am originally from the Northeast, and most of us in the Northeast know, we have the 4 seasons. It's pretty humid in the summer, pretty humid a lot of the time. And so we don't see firsthand the effects of wildfires that we hear about, especially in California and the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest too. Like Oregon has been having a lot of wildfires, and always have, but over the past several years, it seems that they've been getting hotter, longer, and more destructive. And I wanted to talk about that today, and what can we maybe do to prevent them. So yeah, I worked in New Mexico for a couple of summers at this place called Philmont Scout Ranch. And last year, I was still living in Germany, a little bit over a year ago. And I remember, it was the start of the season. I was a little sad because I wasn't going back to work that year. And just before the season started, where there would be Boy Scouts coming in from all over the nation to go hiking in this beautiful place, a fire broke out. And this was a massive fire right in the middle of the land that's Philmont, and ripped all the way across the middle of it. And just as this fire was getting put out and they were ready, to start the season, 3 weeks late, another one broke out. This time in the South Country, where most of the hiking trails had been established, and they ended up having to close for the entire season. I remember watching all of my former colleagues who had gone back for the season, taking on a much different challenge than they'd anticipated. They were expecting to be working with teenagers all summer, helping them to understand the beauty of the land that we are stewards of at this point. And instead, they were actually cleaning up from an extremely destructive fire. I wrote about this, while I was in the green of northern Germany, which, funnily enough, this year was hit by a wildfire for the first time in decades.
Wow.
Since World War II, when it was being bombed. Which,
wasn't a bomb this time.
It was not a bomb this time.
Dresden.
No, it was further north in Mecklenburg. But that made those fires feel very real for me. And I don't know that everyone in the Northeast in particular has that kind of experience where it's like, oh, what can we do? And I think the worst part about this fire is that everyone who was working at Philmont for decades before knew that it was going to come.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that at some point there was going to be a fire so destructive that we were going to have to close for the season for the first time since the 1930s. It had never happened. actually, years before, they had started clearing out dead wood with the intention of burning some of it out of the land so that so that fires wouldn't be as destructive as they came.
Right.
Unfortunately, that obviously didn't happen soon enough. In the United States, for a long time, we've looked at fires as the enemy.
This is very interesting to me.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so we've looked at fires totally as the enemy. You know, we probably even from our childhoods know of Smokey the Bear as this, like, you know, big, chubby, friendly guy who's like...
Oh, he's a bear,
you know,
not a guy.
Yeah, well, a guy bear.
He wears pants. And a hat.
So this big, furry, friendly bear who says, you know, be careful with what you're doing. Don't start wildfires. Always is warning when it's too dry or too hot to not start wildfires.
Right.
And to some extent, you know, there's a good reason for that. So you don't want random campers in the middle of Yosemite starting fires when it's too dry and starting, you know, having a campfire that turns into half of Yosemite being burned. However, it's a policy that the government also adopted. And for a long time, even the Forest Service and any environmentalist organizations saw any fire as bad fire. So any fire that started had to be immediately put out.
Yeah.
No matter whether it was minor or massive, it had to be fought immediately. And in fact, any action that was done that was not immediately fighting the fire could be disciplinary. Like, you could go under disciplinary action if you made an action that was not immediately fighting the fire.
If you're working for one of these Forest Services.
Yeah. So if you looked at a fire and you're like, okay, well, we're just gonna, you know, we'll let it reach this certain spot and then we'll fight it. Like, you know, that could be calls for disciplinary action because you weren't immediately fighting it and immediately trying to contain and extinguish.
And I know some people listening might be confused as to why you might want even let a fire burn at all, but I think we'll get to that shortly.
Yeah. So that is... Sorry, I just have to take a break for a second, take a drink.
Yeah.
And so this is a change in policy. So for a long time, the U.S. government and various environmental agencies was like, fire, bad, you know, and Smokey the Bear, you're saying, Mary, is kind of like the metaphorical equivalent of that. We're just like a great example of, you know, don't start fires, kids, you know, it just sort of epitomizes that. But you're saying now, like, something's changing.
Well, what has happened as a result of those policies?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so something is changing. Basically, we've recognized that over the past few decades, the fires that we've been seeing have been getting more intense. There is now the term megafire, and, you know, you think that if there's a forest fire, it's really only destructive if it's going to be burning outside of the forest. One thing that I learned during my work at Philmont was sort of the difference between a healthy fire and an unhealthy fire. And a healthy fire is a fire that is, you know, low energy, kind of burns consistently at a lower temperature and doesn't touch the crowns. Exactly. So when you get into a crown fire, which is what will actually burn the tops of the trees and prevent future growth, that is what these mega fires are happening. They're much hotter, they're much higher, and they're burning for longer periods of time now and at more, like, over larger areas of land, which means that those forests aren't having the ability to regrow.
Right. So what we've seen over the past, let's just say, 100 years as a result of the steps that the government and other environmental agencies have taken as a result of fighting fires is that any fire has been treated as bad and to be put out as soon as possible. But what that has enabled is a lot of sort of materials that are typically burned in these smaller fires to build up, which then contributes to hotter fires that burn longer, that lead to the crowns of trees burning and eventually causing these mega fires. In fact, in one of the articles we read for this show today, in the New Yorker, they said that 6 of the 10 worst fires in California's history have occurred in the past year and a half, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and when you think about the fact that California produces a lot of our food, that's not great.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, the deadliest fire in U.S. history since at least like the early 1900s was the Camp Fire last year. For those of you who remember, I mean, it was like 80 or more people died, and the entire sort of town was leveled. It was horrifying, and then that happens quite often. You see now, and I think that the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, declared like a state of emergency in regards to the fires or something like. Earlier this year,
March.
And it's not even fire season yet.
Fire season began.
Right, so they're kind of just saying like this is the new norm.
Yep.
Yeah, and so the question that I've been sort of leading up to is, what can we do? We've seen these fires getting hotter and bigger, and what can we do to prevent those or to fight them? Well, what we can actually do is, in the title of this episode, we can fight fire with fire. And this isn't by, like letting a fire start and then just making more fire, but this is by actually lighting smaller fires at more regular intervals. This article in the New Yorker was really fascinating, went into sort of the history of getting prescribed burns to actually work. So prescribed burns are the term for controlled burns that are set by the Forest Service with the intention of burning a particular spot to keep that forest healthy so that it won't be affected by larger fires later on. So it goes into the process of getting communities, environmental organizations, the Forest Service, and logging companies and things all together to decide what is best for this one particular forest in the Tahoe area in Nevada, like the border of Nevada and California. It's definitely worth a read, but
can I just say that if you're an arsonist right now, you're like, oh my God, I can get paid for this now.
Yeah.
I can start fires legally, and it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing, Mary?
And maybe not if you're an arsonist,
maybe not
because then you
that.
probably don't want to put the fire out. But the idea, so the idea is that you start these small, low-intensity fires on a planned area, and then put them out. And so that clears out dry wood. It clears out all the pine needles that have fallen. In the article, it mentions that they're talking
rolling
about one spot. Yeah, rolling lit pine cones. But there's like in some places, 10 inches or feet deep of just pine needles, which means that when it rains, the rain doesn't even actually go into the ground. It just gets absorbed by all those pine needles. And so these smaller fires will clear out those pine needles, will clear out any dead trees, dead branches, and will give the trees what they call breathing room. So it'll allow rain to get into the ground and, keep the groundwater full so that the trees have something to drink. It allows the crowns to stay intact. If you're not familiar with dendrology very much, trees actually have so this is a study of trees. Trees have a living membrane right under the bark. And usually with these low-intensity fires, the bark is there to protect that membrane. And low-intensity fires can't get through that bark, especially if you're talking about fires or about trees that are native to the West Coast. They have evolved to be resistant to fires in certain ways. And some trees actually need it to thrive.
Right.
Like their pine cones won't burst unless they're hot enough. And so they actually need it to spread.
Just crazy.
Yeah. But they've evolved that way. So these low-intensity fires won't hurt the trees at all. But high-intensity fires that get through the bark will kill the trees, which is what I was mentioning earlier with preventing further growth.
They also even talk about clearing away smaller, younger trees that are less resistant to fires than older trees that have a much thicker layer of bark.
Yeah. And this is also a practice, which the article also goes into the fact that many Native American communities would do this. They would start smaller fires every few years, sometimes up to every 2 years, but often like 5 to 10 years, if the fires hadn't been started naturally by lightning or other things.
Nomadic tribes, indigenous to the region.
Yeah, so they might, go to a place for the summer, and then as they're leaving, they would light it on fire so that the next year things could grow and they would have one example was having fresh willow saplings for weaving baskets the next year. So this is a practice that has been, it's been consistent throughout American history before it was settled.
It's only taken us 400 years to figure it out.
Yeah, before it was settled by Europeans. So it is not a new thing, and the forests have gotten used to that, and that's, they've evolved into that. And for a long time, before people were there, fires started naturally. So this isn't an uncommon thing. It's not a new thing, but it's something that we're realizing we need to include in policy. Unfortunately, it's not something that's getting a lot of funding.
Yeah, it's not happening quickly enough.
Correct. So in this article, it also mentioned that, there have been policies in place that support prescribed burns since the 90s. Have we been seeing any of those?
This is the first I've read about it.
Yeah, we haven't been seeing a lot because I don't remember the specific percentage, but a very small percentage of the prescribed burns that have actually been suggested by these policies have ever actually happened.
I think it's 1%.
Yeah,
I was going to say 3, but
ridiculously
it's very,
small
very small. And as a result, with, in conjunction with climate change, which is causing more drought, drier fuel for these enormous fires, we're seeing fires that are more deadly and much more intense.
Interestingly, sort of policies on climate change are contributing to the sort of difficulty people are having in enacting these prescribed fires. I know that the Clean Air Act, for example, is limiting the number of sort of available days when prescribed burns can even be carried out. It's something like only a couple a year or a few days out of the year.
Yeah.
In the spring, which is not even during the actual dry season.
It'd be pretty hard to burn things a lot in the spring.
So it's like the prescribed burns can't even occur when they perhaps need most to be occurring.
Yeah. Because it's hard to stop them.
Can I ask that? Okay, so now there's a lot of fires. It's heart-wrenching. It's devastating. It's scary. And they're very large, and they're mega fires, and they sort of really destroy the forest, and they don't really allow for the kind of growth that you want to see to happen again. But Mary, can't you just, does it actually destroy things? Or do you know if, okay, right now it really stinks, but once these fires have their course, then we're going to be okay because, we're having just really large burns happening?
What do you mean?
I mean, is there any good that's coming out of all these fires that we're having now, or are they too large and destructive and hot?
I think the biggest sort of loss is that the trees that are destroyed are very old, and it takes a long time for them, obviously because they're very old, to get back to plant trees that will replace them, essentially. And those trees are important just as the Amazon rainforest is in taking in CO2 and producing oxygen. And so the larger trees, I think, are a priority that need to be protected.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So if you're having smaller fires, as we've been talking about, that are either started by lightning or whatever, that those aren't killing the forest. So you still have that area of land that can continue to absorb CO2 and release oxygen. On the other hand, if there's a mega fire, you don't have a forest there anymore. You don't have a piece of land that's absorbing CO2 and releasing oxygen. You have empty land. And eventually you'll be able to see regrowth there, but it's going to take decades. So we may not be able to see that regrowth even within our lifetimes.
I also believe that it said in that New Yorker article that megafires burn so hotly that forests are sometimes hotly. They burn
so heatly.
Worse.
Let's go with
it. Their temperatures are so high that oftentimes, without human intervention, forests can't regrow on their own after them.
There's one more thing I want to bring up before we end this episode. And, one of the things I mentioned in not having prescribed burns is that they're not getting the budget for it. However, we don't have the budget for to deal with these mega fires either. Earlier, well, not this year, but at the end of last year, when there were many of these wildfires raging in California, we talked on the show a little bit about how those fires are getting put out. And people aren't paying firefighters to go and put those out. What was happening, in addition to there being some firefighters who were going to fight these fires, was that prisoners were being put on the front lines of fighting fires. Prisoners who don't necessarily have any training, who are not able to get jobs as firefighters after they leave, if they survive, and who were getting paid, $2 a day when fighting the fires, and $1 if they were on the camp.
$1 an hour if they were fighting
an
fire.
hour, okay.
$2 a day, or it wasn't even at the $2 a day. It was like $1.40 a day for being in the camp. I do think that they did get the same training that firefighters got, but it's still.
But they weren't able to get jobs as firefighters afterwards.
It's still pretty
after they left.
Horrible that they were only paid what they were, and that they were also sort of leveraged by being offered reduced sentences.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly volunteer. It was, being voluntold, and it looks like we have a caller.
I mean, it is volunteer, but it's coercive, in my opinion.
So we do have a caller here. Hi, you are on the air. Hello.
Hi, Aaron from Queens here. I
Aaron,
know you're
you have like
Aaron,
30 seconds.
you have
the show.
Aaron, thank you so much for calling. You have 15 seconds to make your point because then we got to roll.
Perfect. That's all I need. This is about the first half of the show. Capitalism is incompatible with environmentalism. If the capitalist system is not abandoned entirely, the Amazon will end. Finite resources, infinite growth on a finite planet is impossible. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Aaron, thanks a lot for giving us a call. I agree with you.
Couldn't agree more.
So,
also, real quick, just to bring up your point, Mary, about the cost of fighting these fires versus the cost of the impact that having the fires will have on us. Bernie Sanders has said the same thing with his climate change plan, which is that, it costs a lot to fight climate change. It costs more to not do anything about it. So.
Exactly.
Yep. And with that, we do have to roll here on the 64th episode of Evidence of Design. Thanks for tuning in on this Saturday, August 24th. Up next is the Esquire Hour. They put on a killer show. Thanks for tuning in to 100.9 FM WXIR, and thank you, WXIR, for having these discussions and being a platform for grassroots radio at a time when that is under attack. I was your host, Jason Taylor, here, and also good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
I mysteriously appear to lose weight.
And Mary Lawrence.
Rolling like a pine cone down a hill.
Be well, be safe, and bye-bye.
Return to Rochester's urban alternative radio station, 100.9 FM, WXIR, extreme